All right. Hey, everyone. How's it going? This is Reyes Ramirez. I am the Programs Outreach Coordinator for Fresh Arts. If you haven't tuned in before, Fresh Arts is a nonprofit arts organization primarily based out of Houston. We offer resources, knowledge sharing, professional development, particularly for artists and creatives. And I say primarily in Houston because that's where we are. We're situated right here in the Arts District at Sawyer Yards. But through our digital programming, such as the one you're watching right now, we think we have a bit of a more reach. And so we're really happy for that. So again, if you haven't been here before, welcome. Hopefully that gives you a good primer as to what we are, who we are. If you've been here before, thank you. Welcome back. So July, I hope you've had a really great July thus far. Just started, but you never know. So last month, if you were tuning in, and if you didn't, we covered a lot of COVID-19 crisis-related conversations and how artists were responding to that, or how they were working through it or with it. And so for July, we want to do something a little different. We definitely want to address issues of equity within the arts. We know that we have a platform. It's something we discuss all the time. And one of the ways that Fresh Arts wants to kind of help this conversation in regards to cultivating equity in the arts is by being transparent and talking with the community, with people in the community, with artists who deal with this and who work with this and address this through their work in so many other ways. And again, we have some really great guests. I'll get to them in a second. Let me just go through some kind of things. So one, I just want to say that, again, today's conversation is regarding arts writers of color. We have two writers, and obviously they represent their work, and they're going to be talking about their work. But as an organizer, I just want to say that it is by no means like representative of the entire arts writing community. There's just so many ways to engage with arts writing. I'm an art writer myself. I write reviews for books, film, and visual arts exhibitions, all that great stuff. But even then, I have my own style. I have my own particular way that I go and address those things and do my writing. And so we have two writers today that have different ways they present their work. And that's kind of why we invited them, among many other reasons. But just to kind of give you an idea that, again, this by no means represents all the voices, nor all the perspectives, nor all the ways in which art writing can happen. And so I just want to say that. I just want to say that also we're learning as an organization as well. And so we hope that, we don't come off as the main authority on what equity in the arts looks like. That's why we want to have a conversation with community, more partners and members, so that we together can work together to create what that equity looks like, what a more equitable arts community looks like. So with all that said, just kind of going back, if you have not seen our videos before, you're more than welcome to go to our Artist Resource Library, where we host and archive all of our videos and discussions we've had in the past. So if you haven't tuned in, or you have and you want to revisit something, please visit our Artist Resource Library right there. And then kind of going forward with this conversation, you're more than welcome to post your questions in the comments, and we will screen them and we will ask them on air if we feel they're relevant. But again, just know that you're always welcome to include yourself in the conversation and ask a question, pose a comment. In fact, I'm going to give you a prompt to kind of respond to. Please post any arts articles, particularly by arts writers of color that you like, that you found useful. Feel free to post them right in the comment section. And also just for myself, I love reading different arts writers of color, reading different perspectives. So please post those, and I'd be really happy to visit those. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our guests, our very esteemed guests, who I'm just going to say their author photos are beyond amazing. I'm jealous. I hope to have as good as author photos as they do someday. So first up, we have Brenda Edith Franco. Brenda Edith Franco is a photographer and media coordinator based in Houston, Texas. She received her BFA in photography from the University of Houston in 2015 and is now pursuing an art practice as well as creating resources and platforms for artists. She's a regional contributor for Deep Red Press, an independent Texas-based publisher highlighting photographers working in the Texas region. She has shown in galleries in Houston, Fort Worth, and Mexico City, and has been published in several independent zines, including Untitled Chapter zine. In 2013, she participated in the Latino Leadership Initiative hosted at Harvard University's Kennedy School for Public Policy that further strengthened her interest in community organizing. When she's not working with artists or creating art, she coordinates the media and marketing at Kickstart Kids, a nonprofit with the mission of teaching character through karate within Texas public schools. Follow her Instagram at Brenda Edith Franco or visit her website at brendaedithfranco.com. And then we have Willow Naomi Curry. Willow Naomi Curry is a writer, researcher, and social practice artist from the historically Black Houston neighborhood of Kashmere Gardens. Her written works have appeared in national print and online magazines, including Literary Hub and Fourth Genre print anthologies, and Houston's own yearly arts publication, What's the New News. Her social practice projects include the writing workshop series, Letters and Lives, and the photography exhibition, The Fourth Ward Photo Parlor, both of which are ongoing. You can receive updates on her work by following her on Instagram at Willa the Wisp. Welcome, you two. How's it going? All right. So to kind of start us off, I'm going to ask some kind of like just introductory questions regarding y'all, and then we're then going to go into the more nitty gritty of what the overall picture, the bigger context is that we're working in. Brenda, can you give an overview of your work and what topics you like to focus on in your writing?
Yeah, well, I think I'm much more of a visual artist, but I do work with Deep Red Press, who you mentioned in my bio. And in that work, I really am interested in speaking to artists and interviewing artists and really dissecting artists' work, what they're doing, what their process is like. A lot of times it's just identifying within the Texas region photographers, specifically photographers that are just pushing the bounds as to what living and the experience of living in Texas is. And that's really where my writing is rooted at the moment, is working with artists and just finding out more about how their work is made.
Thank you. And then Willow, same question. Can you give an overview of your work and what topics you like to focus on? Hello, Willow. Did you hear the question?
No.
All right.
I am kind of far away from my router.
I'll go ahead. Can you give an overview of your work and what topics you like to focus on?
Yes. So my work is pretty wide-spanning. I guess I primarily entered the creative field as a creative writer. I'm an essayist in particular, and in general, I write narrative nonfiction. And with that, I generally focus on my experience as a raced person, specifically Black person in America and in the South. I talk about racism and colonialism in America in general. And I also talk very specifically about people and environments in historically Black neighborhoods in Houston in particular. And as far as my arts practice goes, that developed out of my writing practice. So I realized that I needed to have a multidisciplinary approach in order to talk about some of the things that I wanted to address. So with that, I really hope historically Black neighborhoods like the Fourth Ward Photo Parlor obviously focuses on Houston's historic Fourth Ward Freedmanstown neighborhood. Letters and Lives focuses the next iteration, will continue to focus on Kashmere Gardens, Trinity Gardens, and Fifth Ward. And right now I'm working with a consortium or organization led by the Fifth Ward Community Redevelopment Corporation on a project, an oral history project, based on the historic club matinee in Fifth Ward. So for my social practice projects, it's very much like, it's about Houston's historically Black neighborhoods.
All right, thank you. So kind of in regards to kind of on that, Brenda, you mentioned that your main practice is as a photographer. Willow, you've mentioned that you do your own art in terms of your photography, multidisciplinary practices. So I'm going to ask two questions based on that. Why go then into art/critical writing? Why did you choose to focus on writing about arts and artists? And I'll ask Brenda that first.
Yeah, I think that for me, it was seeing an opportunity to, I don't know, explore an interest of mine that it wasn't something I had nurtured in, at least in my college years, but found that I had that opportunity after meeting the editor of Deep Red, which is Raul Rodriguez. Shout out to Raul. He created this publication and I guess saw that I have an interest in artists, and in the similar way that he found an interest in my work and as a curator. I think a lot of times it's mutual community, being able to see my community and really the yearning for wanting to create a platform to uplift those voices, and selfishly because I love art, I love photography, and I wanted to have a reason to be able to ask these maybe tough questions, maybe at times questions that aren't asked in the classroom, or questions that I can't ask because I'm not there during critiques. And so to me, it's both it's a sort of a selfish reason, but maybe also just I really love art, and I love artists, and I love what photographers are doing, and I want to know more about their work.
Yeah, and Willow, the same question. Why go into art critical writing? Why did you choose to focus on art and writing about the art and artists, as opposed to kind of like sticking to like a photography or sticking to a narrative nonfiction, not about art? Why go into that?
So this goes back to my interest in historically Black communities, actually. Because I generally find myself surrounded by artists, and honestly, I was mistaken when I said that I entered the creative field as a writer. Like, I've tried different forms of art and been an artist in different disciplines throughout my life, like costume design. I've done visual art, music, like all of that. So that's always been a part of my background. But I'm just very fascinated in general by Black people's contributions to arts and culture in general, and I often have to dig a lot for that. So, for example, when in doing my research for the Fourth Ward Photo Parlor, which was really not necessarily based on writing about art, I came across an artist named Naomi Polk, and she was born, I believe, she was born in the 1890s, and she passed away in 1984. And she was basically a recycled artist. Texas is the birthplace, really, of what we know now as the recycled arts movement, what with Jeff McKissick and the Orange Show, especially. But Naomi Polk was doing this before that, and she was doing it as a single mother whose husband actually, her husband was actually lynched, and she found herself having to support her family. And she did it in a way that was very uncommon for Black women in the 1930s. She was also a poet. And so I was doing research for something else, but I found myself really compelled by this woman who chose to pursue art and sell her art and consider herself an artist, even though she never received mainstream recognition in her life. And even though it was really just a non-traditional, like not even non-traditional, it wasn't even, it was like considered probably a joke for someone of her economic background. She was the daughter of a slave in the South. So as I do research about different historically Black neighborhoods, I find out about these people and about these collaborations. For example, there's another one between Nikki Leland and the Manels and some of the Black Panthers in Houston. And they created the Deluxe Show, which was actually the first racially integrated contemporary modern art exhibition in the United States, and it occurred in Fifth Ward. So my motivation in writing about the arts is uncovering the creative contributions that Black people in neighborhoods that are considered, not cultural destinations, that are considered the ghetto, that are considered places where people aren't intelligent or aren't capable of having meaningful cultural contributions. I'm saying no, they always have been there. You just don't know about them, or you don't know about this event that happened. So it's very much for me about uncovering those hidden histories.
Well said. So kind of one thing that I'm going to just point out, and then we'll touch upon this later, but I think y'all brought up really great points about what you're reacting to or what your interest is, and kind of along those lines, of the institutional of not covering certain things, or not covering certain topics, or not touching upon certain artists or art scenes or movements. And so Willow, you talked about how, Black artists have always been creating great work. It's whether or not it's been recognized, or whether or not these institutions wish to recognize them.
Right.
Brenda, you talk about your practice in your interviews of how what critique means, right? Critique even within itself is kind of like an institutional value of this is, we're going to talk about your work within this context of an academy or a university or an institution, how you wish to kind of address that. And so we'll get to that in a minute. I just want to say I see that, and that's great. But kind of a follow-up to, as I said, there's two parts. The second part is how do then, therefore, again, with being multidisciplinary and different practices, how do all those things intertwine for y'all? For me, I'm a writer. I write poetry, I write fiction, I write essays, I write reviews, I write all that. But I kind of keep them separate in terms of how they're defined, but also they inform the other, and how I approach writing and research. And I kind of use them for different tools or for different purposes. And so Brenda, can you talk about how maybe you're interviewing or how you're writing maybe intertwines with that photography practice?
Yeah, I think they definitely intertwine. I think photography and writing go hand in hand. I think that with coming from a primarily heavy photography background, within the studio, you kind of figure that, talking about photography as well, speaking on it, there's there's nuances in that. There's nuance in photography, and a lot of times I feel that, a photograph can seem so simple, but once you start looking at it a little bit more, attentively, you start to dissect a lot. You can, as with any artwork. And I think that writing is a great facilitator to having those conversations. And for me, that's kind of where I like to see myself as, like, that person, that individual that gets a chance to take a look at someone's work and perhaps say, why use text? Why, what was the idea behind that? And ask something that, as I said before, I wouldn't be able to otherwise ask. I think also photographers and artists really in general, they want to share this wealth of knowledge. They want to share their whys and, their processes, and to have someone be interested in those whys. I think that goes hand in hand. Art photography and writing, photography in general, really.
Yeah, thank you. Willow, same question. How do those practices intertwine, of your social practice, your writing practice, your organizing practice? How does that all intertwine?
So first of all, I want to say I really appreciate what Brenda said about photographers, especially. I think there's so many words and statements in the images that they make, and a lot of them have a lot to say about that. So I really appreciate that perspective. But to your question, to me, so all of my practices are definitely rooted in addressing key questions about identity, about who is considered valuable, who is considered a source of culture, and so that's something that's present in all my work, whether it's my writing or my social practice art or my organizing. I really see them as like different tools to accomplish the same goals. So, wait just a moment. Wait just a moment. I'm sorry. I have to leave for just a moment.
It's all good. It's all good. So, like, moving forward with kind of this line of questioning, maybe Brenda, could you talk about? So you work with Deep Red Press, and let me show that to the audience real quick. That website, which I think is a really great resource. And just for full transparency, I've been published with Deep Red Press.
Yeah.
So just kind of full disclosure on that, because I think it is such a great platform. Let me pull that up, and then there we go. So here's your interviews in particular, but here's Deep Red Press's website. So deepredpress.com. And you go in here, and there's a lot of great articles, a lot of great resources in terms of like who is working in Texas, and you can click on these. This is really great. But kind of, why did you feel that Deep Red Press was like a good venture for you to join in particular to your practice, and particularly because, like you said, your main thing is photography, and so like, why go into like that venture of Deep Red Press, of doing these interviews, of doing these highlights and focuses?
Well, I think sort of also in tangent to your earlier question, interdisciplinary and organizing, and how all these things do come together. I think that that's part of it, is that I believe that there's strength in numbers, and I think that whenever you are able to be with an organization, no matter how small, and I have to say, it's really, as it's really, sometimes it's a one-man show, but with guests and contributors such as myself, but it's really Raul who's put this together, and it's his passion project. And but what I see it as is, being able to come in forward, and again, there's strength in numbers. I think that whenever you join something, and one that I feel is very special, so already there's this feeling of value there. It's a platform that is there to amplify voices that I don't think would, not that they wouldn't be amplified otherwise, but it's just one more way that we can amplify them. And that to me is what sort of brought me and intrigued me of it. I recall letting Raul know earlier this week that we don't do this to make money. We don't do this to it's not something that we do because we feel it's going to make us rich. It's something that we're very passionate about. And when when we have people come forward and look at what we're doing, I think that there's pride in that. But yeah, I think that Deep Red is just one of those really beautiful passion projects that's turning into a really great way to lift up artists and photographers here in Texas that that I feel personally a very strong connection to their work, and I'm happy to see that happening.
So then I guess kind of like the follow-up to that is like, well, why not publish the interviews with someone else? Like what other ventures or what other publications, like why in particular did you feel you wanted to kind of add to Raul's passion to that project, as opposed to kind of like doing your own blog or your own publication? Like what challenges have you run into with that?
I think, again, I like the idea of strength in numbers, to be able to have something that's within a group. I really feel that that's kind of where my background in organizing is as well. It's people power. You do things with people around you, and if you have big ideas, you can't do them. You can try to do them on your own, and that's very it's novel and it's great. But I personally am of the philosophy and thought that if you have people around you and you really want to do something big, you need people power. You need people around you to do that. And so I don't think that if I were to be doing this on my own, that I would be able to have as much of a reach as if it were something that is a collaborative effort in this sense. Yeah.
Yeah, and I particularly like Deep Red Press. I've submitted to them and I've gotten published with them. Another reason why is because in regards to Texas, or I should say in Houston, it's very, I wouldn't say rare, but it's in terms of publishing with a predominantly POC run publication in regards to the arts. Could you kind of speak to a bit about that, like of being involved in that kind of project where it is POC run?
For sure, which is another big reason that attracted me to the publication, is that really a big reason, the way that Raul explained it to me when he was sort of pitching me the idea of contributing, was what the reason for why the name Deep Red Press. Deep Red was created because he wanted to have this weird contradiction of what Texas is normally seen as. And a lot of times it's a very red state. Outside of Texas, there's the stereotypes. We all know, if you're a Texan that's been here, we kind of know what those stereotypes are. And to have that, the work that we show and the people and the artists that we seek to put out, a lot of times we really try to push against that grain of those stereotypes. We want to show that the Texan experience is so much broader and richer than that. And we see that from works all the way to El Paso, San Antonio, Fort Worth, Dallas, even here in Houston, Austin. And so there's a lot of really rich things that are happening. And I think that because we're POC, we're sensitive to those things. We're much more aware of seeking those stories out and wanting to have those stories heard, not just because yes, they're important to us perhaps, but also because why not? Why aren't those stories important too? And why can't those stories also be definitive of what the Texas experience is of living here in this really huge state and what that can look like? And so with that, I think, yes, we do showcase a lot of POC. We definitely showcase Black artists as well, all across the board. We've had a wealth of artists, but we really try to, more than anything, within the identity of Texas and pushing the boundaries of what that looks like.
Absolutely. And then I'm going to ask you one more question before I bring Willow back on. What in regards to your actual writing, like, and I mentioned earlier that we all have different ways in which we approach arts writing. And just for the audience, I define arts writing as any writing related to the analysis or aboutness of art or art events or art history, right? And so yours in particular, I write reviews, I write criticism, but you do interviews. And so can you kind of tell me why you choose specifically, or why interviews as opposed to feature writing or criticism or anything like that?
I think I might be a little bit more critical about myself, but I read your work and it's so intellectual and it just I don't think I don't express myself through words in that way. I'm very visual, and so for me, where my art writing comes from, it, like as you said, is through interviews. And that's, again, I love artists. I love art and photography specifically. And so I find a lot of joy actually, being able to sit down and begin the research process of these artists and going through their websites, going through their work, going through, their catalogs, and finding what feels like the right questions to ask. A lot of times, a lot of it is just rooted in what the work is saying, and I try personally in my writing and my questioning not to be too caught up in, I guess, the identity politics of it all, if I could say that. I really want to know about the work. The work is what's important to me, and it's obviously important to the artists. If not, they wouldn't be making it. And as an artist myself, I don't want to be talking about why I'm making work as a brown woman. I want to be talking about why, I chose to use a location. Those are the kinds of questions that get me excited about talking about my work. Why a color scheme? Where were the ideas behind, certain topics that I'm talking about? And that's where I find a lot of the excitement in questioning and writing these interviews is really trying to dig into the work, and if if identity and even politics does run into those answers, then let it be. Let the artist do that. But um I'm more interested in what the work is about and how that work came to be. And that's kind of how I see a lot of my interviews as.
Awesome. Thank you for that. Can we bring Willow back on? Kind of because like this next comment, I really want to kind of get some input in, like in terms of like identity politics and writing about different identities. And I think it's always kind of interesting as an art writer myself, the context of like usually labeled as kind of like culture writing or culture or writes about culture. But and when publications do that, what they really mean is like they're not white. They're not a white writer. It's like, oh, they write about culture. But it's sort of like, well, we're all writing about culture, like when you write about like a European exhibition featuring French artists, that's culture. I mean, that's our writing of culture. Plenty of critics, not white critics, write about culture, but they just don't call it that because I think that's kind of the normalization of that viewpoint, which I think kind of in a lot of ways we're all reacting against in our own way, and we're all kind of processing that and being part of that process. And so I just wanted to say that, and I think that was like a really apt, really cool way that you're approaching that. Willow, I'm going to show your website. I'm going to show some articles that you've done, and then I'll ask you some questions in particular. So I'm going to share my screen. So there we go. And so here's your website, willownCurry.com, and you can see all the great work you've done. And then here's one of your latest essays about building the artistic agenda for an activist movement, which it's great. Another article you've written here for What's the New News, issue 3, which, full disclosure, I'm also published in.
I love your work in that issue. It's amazing.
Oh, thank you. No, yeah, I mean, thank you. Your work is equally amazing. Oh, it's not loading up for some reason. The internet's being funky. Yeah, so here's Activist Architecture, another amazing essay you wrote. And here's another essay you wrote. And I kind of one thing that I want to note, this is still not coming up. All right, oh well. One thing that I really want to bring up in terms of your practice and what you do in your writing, you write in your own way in regards. So I write criticism. Brenda writes interviews. You particularly write like essays that feature artists. And I think there's like its own way around that. Like the What's the New News, you wrote about Mecca and its own art festival, but you didn't write about the art. You wrote about the things surrounding the art. Yes. And so I'm curious as to like your approach to that and why you're kind of like hitting that note.
So that's a really good question. So this kind of goes back to focusing or uncovering artists that have kind of been buried in, or art exhibitions or collaborations that have been basically buried in the archives. I am really interested in the historical and cultural and political circumstances that art happens in. And like that's pretty obvious in my essay about like building an artistic agenda for an activist moment. But for me, I never separate art or artists from the political context and the social context and the cultural context that they're in, especially when I am researching artists or art events that have happened in the past, because it plays a huge role, even if, for example, the deluxe show, which happened in 1971, it featured several Black color field painters. And color field painting is not, it's very much, you know, what Brenda was just talking about in terms of like why you chose a location, why you chose a color scheme. You know, it's very much about the pure aesthetics of it. But I'm less interested in that than understanding the context in which this exhibit happened, the context in which the people who brought it together, like how they formed the relationship to make it happen, where it happened, which was in Fifth Ward. All of those things are things that I believe go under discussed in terms of writing about art, because really a lot of art publication, in fact, I've actually had a lot of difficulty finding good places to publish my writing about art. Because when you go past the art itself, like critiquing the art itself, and when you go past, you know, and to understand the artist, you go past all of those things and consider, you know, what was everything surrounding it? You know, why were the Manils interested in putting together an interracial art show in Fifth Ward? How were the Manils involved with a radical Black congressman? Why did it occur in the Deluxe Theater? And what was the significance of the Deluxe Theater at the time? And I think that a lot of the reason for that ahistoricism when it comes to, I think, modern art criticism is because America very much doesn't want to see any of its cultural products in historical and social and political contexts. We have a very strong tendency to isolate the product, isolate the work, isolate the artist, and consider them like a standalone figure, because we haven't dealt with the concepts that we haven't dealt with our history, and we're very willfully ignorant about the societal conditions in which we live. And I find that really interesting because I studied visual arts at the High School for Performing and Visual Arts here in Houston. And when we were taking art history, all of the works that we studied, we learned about the context that they were created in. And so when you take like a traditional Western European-based art history course, you learn about works in their context. So that's what I'm doing actually, but it's not in line with how I think Americans, and I think the West in general, as it is now, wants to understand itself. It's very immediate. It's very disconnected from like what the larger social circumstance, social situation is. And so I want to recouple those things and say, you know, why is this happening? Who were the power players? What were the consequences of this particular collaboration? Or why was this artist not recognized during their lifetime? And I really hope, and that's something that I really like about What's the New News, is that I think it has the potential, it has so much of the potential to do that, because it really does take a different look at understanding art than so many of the arts publications that I read. And I think it's something that's really necessary in writing about art.
Absolutely. So let's bring Brenda back on, probably because the next kind of point I want to bring up is you brought up challenges, Willow, of publishing. I will say myself as an arts writer, I've constantly run into the issue where I'll incorporate like academic texts, I'll incorporate pop culture, I'll incorporate personal history, I'll incorporate the news. And usually the challenge I run into is that, I get like, oh, it's not academic enough, or it's not within this voice. When, as you said, Willow, it's all part of that, the circumstance in which it's created. And then it's also like kind of a bit of Brenda's, where it's like, okay, why make this choice to present the art in this way? Like, why in a film was a crane shot used as opposed to a tracking shot, right? And so, like, I guess talking about a little bit about the challenges of being an arts writer of color and kind of like being published or navigating these publishing routes. So, Brenda, can you talk a bit about like maybe any challenges or any kind of like challenges either as an arts writer, or as an artist, or as a photographer being featured, being written about, or when you do the writing yourself? Can you maybe talk about some challenges you've run into?
So I've done projects as an individual outside of Deep Red, and a lot of times those are very much on my own, and I'm usually doing the editing, not illustrations maybe, but just the putting the writing together, and even printing. I think for me, what I find so refreshing with Deep Red is that if they don't want you at the table, make your own type of thing. And that's really how we see it is, we didn't see ourselves in these other platforms. We didn't see our kind of work being shown. And so with that, we decided, let's make our own. Let's put on, who we want to show, and who are those people. They are people of color. There are, Black, Indigenous people of color, and we want to seek that. They're LGBTQI. They're individuals that are making work that is, again, it's great work. Why aren't we talking about it? And so with that, I just go back to, make your own table. If you don't see yourself, just go ahead and start creating your own platforms. I'm a real big contender of that, and I think for many reasons, but above all, that is why I feel so passionate about Deep Red and what we're doing there. Because like you mentioned, Reyes, you've been on our platform, and we were lucky enough to be able to say, you know what, we're gonna show your writing uncensored, full, with every thought that you have, because we see that there's value in that. There's value in all of the context that you have and have written about. I make your own tables for sure.
Yeah, so just to kind of clue the audience in, so I have an essay that's published on Deep Red Press that was originally published elsewhere, but it was heavily edited for its content. So if you do your homework, you can kind of go into that, but just kind of provide some context. So thank you, Brenda. Willow, same question. What challenges have you run into in getting your work published with what institutions exist now, or what has arisen, and how you get your work out there?
So I do a combination of both. So I am a huge fan of artist-led publications, like the publications that we create for ourselves. So things like, I'm going to say again, What's the New News? I love What's the New News. Like, it to me is just this completely groundbreaking approach to artists writing and writing about art and culture and history and place. So And, you know, I am really interested in creating something like that myself, where I am the one, I'm the one who is writing about this. So maybe making a newsletter, that's something that I have in mind, or making, you know, an actual published zine. And I think that that is one of the most one of the longest standing ways that authors of color in general, whether we're arts writers or not, have given themselves a seat at the table. And I'm thinking about Aunt Loot Press, which is no longer in existence, but which published Audre Lorde, Gloria Anzaldúa, the seminal anthology, This Bridge Called My Back, Radical Writings by Women of Color, came out of that press. Borderlands, La Frontera came out of that press. And it was made by women of color for women of color to have a voice about that. But something else that I do is that I infiltrate mainstream publications by kind of, I go after places that aren't necessarily about art, and I write about art for them because I'm a writer. And they are looking for written content. They're looking for people who are writers and who incorporate writing into their practice. And they're like, all the better if you do art, all the better if you have like multiple disciplines going on. So Literary Hub is about books, but it actually is a platform where people talk about, a lot of the writers discuss visual art, they discuss music and things that are not literature. That's one example. And then there's, you know, going through more mainstream magazines like CourseSpace, which was one of the websites that you pulled up, sadly no longer in existence, also run by women of color. It was a magazine that was focused on work, wellness, and impact. And the founder and my managing editor really allowed us to define that really broadly. So I was able to kind of sneak that into there, not sneak because they knew what I was writing about ahead of time, but I was able to get it out there by putting it in places that aren't necessarily where you would think of to go when you're looking for arts writing. There's one more example of that. I'm trying to think of it. I think it's, where did I get that essay published? I don't know. I'm not going to think about it right now. But yeah, I think it's just a really interesting way of getting that work into the world, is to, because a lot of times, you know, the publications that do just focus on art, they have a very rigid view of what arts writing is. And a lot of times I have to go outside of what is considered arts writing to get my points across and to put things in the context that I want them to be understood in.
I think those are really, really great points to bring up in regards to, you know, arts writing and being writers of color, where it's like, yeah, like you either have to make an entirely new platform or you have to navigate what's there. And I think that's a really, really important thing to consider in regards to what it does it mean to have a healthy, a very active arts writing community. And that kind of goes into some of the last questions I'm going to ask. I'll ask Brenda first and then Willow, obviously. But what do you believe to be an important next step for developing a community of writers of color, art writers of color? so that we can have more features, so that we can be more robust, so we can have more conversations like the one we're having right now?
I think that's wow. It's such an important question for sure. I think that for writers, definitely don't stop putting your work out there. I think Willow made such great points of you navigate these spaces, and you even if you don't think it fits, you still find a way to make it fit. Because it's possible. Obviously, Willow is a great example of what that can look like. And don't underestimate the people's interest in your writing. I think that that's something that, even I found within my own practice. I remember last year wanting to conduct a interview with Teresa Escobedo, at the time the organizer of the union, and she put together such an amazing show of women of color from all South Texas. I was 13 artists, and I had this desire to want to have this interview happen, and we made it happen. And it was so amazing to see how many people were interested in the writing, in the work, and in the words. So don't underestimate that, people won't be interested. Write about what you want to write about, and then put it out there in the world. And maybe you will have no's, but there's gonna be a point where someone's gonna say yes. So put it out there for sure.
So then would you say, kind of to follow up that, is that, yeah, like in terms of like, and Willow, you mentioned this, kind of like these rigid definitions of what arts writing looks like, really like why that is, like, why is that? And I think you bring up a really cool point of like, as far as arts writers, from the arts writers view, write it, write it. Don't worry about the limitations of what the institution has, right? Or like who's going to be publishing what. The most important step is to write it. And you never know, you might find other people who are interested in that same thing, and there are. And who knows, maybe we can make something bigger. Who knows what's going to happen in the future. But Willow, same question. What do you believe to be an important next step for developing a community of arts writers of color?
So I totally agree with what both you and Brenda said, like just not stopping writing, and never underestimating people's interest, because a lot of times the interest is actually found where you least expect it. The thing that I was going to mention actually was that an arts writing project that I'm working on right now is actually my fellowship with the Houston Museum of African American Culture. And they're commissioning me to do written works in response to actually a Confederate monument. And people may have read about that in the news, how the statue of the Spirit of the Confederacy was taken down from Sam Houston Park. And I will be writing written works of different kinds in response to that. And, that's a museum. That's not a publication at all. That's like a totally different avenue of like getting that writing out. So thinking outside of the box in terms of where we put our efforts, where we think that writing should exist. It doesn't just have to exist on the page. It can be spoken. It can be put on a wall. But beyond that, I think that it's also important that we that we actively reject the models of arts writing that Eurocentric publications and institutions give us? Like, if we are recreating that, then we are going to not be encompassing the fullness of what arts writing can be, because I really do think that arts writers of color tend to have a more holistic view of art in general, just because of, you know, the limitations that we face. But if we cut off that creativity and that imaginativeness by modeling the publications that we do create after, you know, what predominantly white institutions or predominantly white publications do, then that's going to be cut off. And so when we are making our own things, I think it's really important to not only to take everything, so to take the poems and plays that respond to a piece of art, or to take the look at the history of a theater in a historically Black neighborhood, to take in the interviews, to take in the criticism, all of these things. And because that's different from what so many white publications and institutions do. And it's so much more powerful. It's so much more imaginative. And it's going to allow for everyone to have a better understanding of what art is and what art means to our society and to us as people. So I think that those two things, so not limiting ourselves to like a flip through magazine or an online magazine in terms of creative output, and also just obliterating the model that we've been given, and creating a model that's inclusive of all of our insight and wisdom.
Yeah. I mean, that's something I constantly kind of question or work with. It's like, you know, why wouldn't a poem that responds to an art piece be considered art writing, right? It's its own kind of analysis, is its own form of processing. And in a way, like to kind of put it in a writer's lens, is like, what languages are we working from? What languages are we building off of? What languages are we responding to? And I think, kind of like to both your points, like not everyone speaks the language of like criticism, right? Or like of the language of like what an academic model looks like. Some people respond to this idea of like interviews. Some people want more of that the logic and the language of two people talking. That's amazing in its own right. The language and processing of history, that's amazing in its own right. And so I think I'm glad to have brought you both on the show to kind of talk about your ideas on this. So out of respect for your time, I wish we had more time, but again, this could always happen again in different outlets, in different ways. But just kind of final thing to do, shout outs, any digital presences, anything you recommend to check out for our viewers. Brenda, please.
Well, for sure, please check out Deep Red Press. We have a bunch of new interviews coming up, and we have 2 fresh new ones for this month, and we have a really exciting one coming up in July with Irene Reese, who recently graduated, received her MFA at the Paris School of Art. So very exciting work there.
I just want to say she's amazing. She's like one of my favorite.
She is something. She is something to be reckoned with. She is a power and force to be reckoned with. So I'm very excited for that. And thank you so much, Fresh Arts. Thank you so much, Reyes, for putting this together. This was amazing. Willow, my gosh, you are amazing as well. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Brenda. Willow, same question. Shout outs, any digital presences you want to give to the audience, anything people should check out?
I definitely encourage people to check out the Houston Museum of African American Culture. They are doing and have been doing great work, And I really appreciate their ability to think of art in general in a very multidisciplinary way. I would also shout out the Deluxe Theater and Fifth Ward Community Redevelopment Corporation. Yeah, I guess I'm going to be saying a lot of organizations. What's the new news? I will keep singing its praises over and over again. Thank you, Nathaniel Donné, for creating it. I'm so thankful to him for creating it. And everybody should be reading Lit Hub because they have everything that you need to know about culture, and that includes like politics. It's not just about books. And yes, I'm so glad to be in conversation with you both. I think this meeting of the minds and ideas has just been so powerful. And all of the ideas that we've contributed, honestly, I'm like, we need to collaborate on something. But thank you for making this happen, Reyes. I really appreciate it. And I really appreciate being in dialogue with you, Brenda.
Thank you both. Just so everyone knows, thank you for y'all. Your support. It's a team effort, absolutely, here at Fresh Hearts. I just want to shout out my team members, Angela, who's doing the back end of this, the production, who's facilitating this conversation. But yes, this is an effort. It's an effort. It's a communal effort. I too also appreciate the meeting of the minds here, and certainly more needs to happen of these. And again, thank you for all your work, both of you. Thank you for the writing. Thank you for the inspiration. I'll see y'all next time. Thank you so much. Yeah, so there you go. Again, just to kind of state again, those are two perspectives, really great ones, but just two of incredibly diverse. There's so many other guests we could have had on, but I'm glad we had them. But again, this just goes to show that this is a conversation that needs to keep happening. Certainly one that needs to be even more expanded upon, because there's just so many different ways of looking at our writing, and the representation of people of color in general. So thank you for tuning in. Just some kind of finishing notes. The Artist Resource Newsletter went out at 3:30. If you didn't get it, subscribe. Just go to our website, fresharts.org. There you'll get, in the Artist Resource Newsletter, you get all kinds of deadlines, including some publications on there. So if you're an art writer, please can look through the Artist Resource Newsletter. There's some places to submit. There's also grants, fellowships, calls for entries for artists, all that great stuff. So check that out. And in conjunction with that, we'll have the resource roundups with me, Reyes, here on Tuesday. So please, same time, same place, check that out, where we'll go through Tuesday, next Tuesday, the resource roundup, where I'll go through the resource newsletter to kind of point out some different ways of approaching applications. Another thing we definitely want to mention, we are announcing is a save the date for the second annual Fresh Arts Summit. We're going virtual. It is August 7th and 8th. If you went to the one last year, great. This isn't going to be an addendum, kind of building off of that energy. If you've never been, if you haven't been, check this one out. It's going to be virtual. We're going to release ways to get involved with that soon, but it's going to be a series of professional development opportunities and workshops and sessions and panels for creatives, for artists, on how we are dealing with the COVID-19 crisis, but also our creative practice in general in this context. So save the date, please, August 7th and 8th. Hopefully we'll see you there. And we're going to mention this again, and you'll get more details as we come along. Next week is going to be the next in our series of equity in the arts. And that episode's going to be focused on language justice in the arts. So far, we have one committed guest, and we're working on the other guests. So we'll let you know as soon as we find out. But it's going to be featuring Jose Eduardo Sanchez from Antena Houston. They do amazing work regarding to language justice and accessibility, and how we, in the conversation, will be how can we include language justice in the practice of art organizing and exhibitions and all that good stuff. Language justice and inclusion is an important aspect of equity, particularly in Houston, one of the biggest and most diverse cities in the nation. So please tune in for that next Thursday. Other things I want to mention is to join our squad, because continuing to offer these unique, free, and vitally important resources requires a network of support. So we kindly ask that you consider supporting our organization by becoming a friend of Fresh Arts if you have the means. Your support allows us to develop resources that respond to the unique needs of artists and artist-led organizations in our region, and help strengthen the arts sector by supporting the people who make it all possible, the artists. So your support will mention so many different. Your support will add to so many things that we're doing now. And in regards to what we're doing, in the last couple months, Fresh Arts' series of live webinars and virtual conversations have reached over 30,000 views. But to better inform us of the impact of this initiative, we humbly invite you viewers to complete our brief impact survey. Your response will allow us to continue these efforts and will inform the future of our programming. So please fill that out. It's quick, helps us out a lot. We just really want to know what you think and how you're reacting to all this, and give us ideas of what we should do in the future. So next week, I'll be here Tuesday at noon and the next Thursday at 4. So please tune in then. Thank you for coming in today. Stay safe, stay well, and I'll see you next time.